In the First World War, as well as the Russian Civil War, armored trains were used to devastating effect even in spite of their incredibly limited mobility and vulnerability to enemy artillery. Well, even in the 1930s, the Soviet Union still considered these lumbering behemoths a threat, and as such, continued to develop countermeasures against them. One such countermeasure was frankly one of the strangest weapons probably ever fielded in the history of warfare, and something that looks so ridiculous it's clear that style was not considered in its development. This absolute contraption of a gadget that looks like some kind of secret weapon from the American Civil War is the ZhDT-3 Railway Torpedo. The official requirements for this weapon were laid out in 1935 by the Armored Vehicle Directorate of the Red Army, with development being transferred to the IES plant in Podolsk, which was more than experienced in building railway equipment of various types. IES quickly began to throw together some designs and would eventually settle on the ZhDT-3, which the number 3 would imply that there were at some point 2 prior designs, but to this day we do not have evidence to prove that. Funnily enough, other plants besides the IES plant were called up for the project, including plant number 80 of the People's Commissariat of Ammunition for remote and contact fuses, which was followed in 1936 by the Krasny Profintern plant, which was called up to develop a special launcher. But we will get to that later. At the end of 1935, the design work at the IES plant was completed and the final version of the ZhDT-3 was ready, with the submission of several prototypes for testing being carried out at the beginning of 1936, though this was to be done without the planned special launcher that it was supposed to have. Unsurprisingly, judging by its appearance alone, the weapon was of a very simple construction and was more suited for mass production, though certain individual components were believed to be a potential source of problems. By the way, the construction of this thing is literally just a framework of metal rods suspending a 100 kilogram explosive charge, which rode on 2 axles, with the front axle wheels being powered through the use of 2 car starters, which were powered rather fittingly by 2 car batteries. Now, according to a handful of reports, the warhead of this weapon consisted of 2 152mm artillery shells stacked with the bottoms touching one another and held in place through a special clamp, which would point to the 100 kilogram mass being the overall mass of the 2 shells, with the actual explosive weight being only around 10 to 12 kilograms. Now, regardless of however the bomb itself was configured, it was still expected to take up nearly half of the weapon's overall 225 kilogram weight. Anyway, once testing began, it was discovered that the starters provided adequate power to accelerate the torpedo to a speed of 37 miles an hour, with the batteries providing around 10 minutes of power, which roughly equated to a range of about 6.2 miles. Testing of the weapon overall went quite well, and the Red Army quickly adopted it, with production beginning in the latter half of 1936, with 20 new examples being issued to troops, as well as establishing the basic combat doctrine for the weapon. The official doctrine called for each Red Army armored train to carry 5 of these torpedoes in order to offer a more than effective counterblow to anything that the enemy could throw at it. Now, as mentioned earlier, the Krasny Profintern plant was involved with creating a special launcher for the weapon, which was to be installed on existing armored trains and would allow the torpedo to be deployed from the mother train to attack enemy armored trains and counter similar devices being launched at the Soviet train. Later in 1936, the launchers were finally provided for testing to units, with full-scale production of the launchers being planned for the following year. Rather oddly, despite the simplicity of the weapon, production was noticeably and alarmingly slow, with production plans for additional production in 1937 practically falling through, with no new torpedoes being produced until 1938, and by 1939, only around 86 had been completed. Now, there may actually be a logical reason for this, which is that once testing with the Red Army had actually began, the weapons had proved to be, how we say, suboptimal. In 1940, following additional testing, it was found that it was incredibly difficult to operate the weapon, primarily due to its lack of any kind of protection, which meant that it could be countered through pretty much something as simple as just firing a rifle at it. This issue was compounded by the fact that its speed was not exactly brisk, and in true combat scenarios, it would have made it all the more easy for the enemy to have adequate time to counter it. Of course, after they've had a couple minutes to roll on the ground and laugh at it. Well, very quickly, the weapon fell out of favor and would lead to the head of the ABTU, Pavlov's proposal for the abandonment of the project on May 16, 1940. In true Soviet bureaucratic fashion, though, the weapon was still not officially retired in 1941, as 26 torpedoes remained in the Red Army's arsenal, with 10 being stored in the warehouses of the Kiev Special Military District, and 4 in the North Caucasus Military District, and another 12 in the Far East. And also, in true obscure Soviet military project fashion, only a single photo seems to exist of this weapon, and no schematics or additional photos have ever surfaced. Now, despite the ZhDT-3 being a failure, a group of partisans would end up creating a similar weapon in October 1943 under the leader of A.M. Grabchak. The mission was to blow the bridge over the Ubort River in the Zhytomyr region, which was a fairly heavily garrisoned target, with all the approaches to the bridge being mined and the Germans having the advantage of a high embankment to fire from. Well, the partisans very quickly figured out that the German commandant would frequently arrive to the bridge on a rail trolley. So over the next 2 weeks, the partisans improvised a trolley from whatever they could scavenge and fitted 5 unexploded aerial bombs on a platform, with one carrying the fuse and a long stick placed between the bombs acting as an oblique target sensor to pull the pin from the bomb once it had deviated from its vertical position. To camouflage the device, the partisans created 2 German soldiers from captured uniforms stuffed with grass and other junk, and rather fittingly, on October 31st, 1943, the trolley was sent to the bridge under power from its own motor. The German troops stationed on the bridge saw the familiar outline of a trolley with people on it and made no attempt to stop its approach, in which the pole eventually struck the bridge, and thus the bridge was blown without a single partisan ever even getting so much as a paper cut, and the only retaliatory fire coming from the Germans minutes after the bridge had already blown up. There was some mention in the book Notes of a Saboteur that after the destruction of the bridge over the Ubort River, there was a short-lived program carried out to create a new special railway torpedo which was manufactured at Kharkov Enterprises, but no information has been found to back this here claim. I find it personally rather comical that a weapon that looks like it was created by some American Southerners with a little too much whimsy juice in their system was out rednecked by some partisans who hee-hawed them with a trolley made from whatever junk they could find laying around, and the best part is that the partisans' device actually worked. So looking back, did the ZhDT-3 have any lasting impact? No, it didn't. It was incredibly dumb. Now thankfully the Soviets never really tried anything else too oh my goodness, they tried to make an electric railgun. Well, anyway, that'll about do it for this here piece of video graphic entertainment. I hope you all have enjoyed this here video. As usual, I would like to give a special shout out to my channel members, especially those in the Table Size Collective, Lord Hoth 4443, and Techno Idioto. And I would like to give an especially huge shout out to my top and only patron, Bombird205, who is an honorary member of the Monochrome. And if you wish to support me, you can either support me here on YouTube or on Patreon. I also have a Discord server, which I definitely totally keep up with. I have no clue what the next video will be, but I will say that I do have plans for potentially something regarding the TOG here soon. So just keep your ears open on that one. But anyway, I must now depart for the Abyssal Kmart. So take care, everyone. God bless, you are all loved, and, bye, I guess?